Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this new session of the Cañada Blanch lectures done together with the Government of Department of Geography and Environment, in which we have the enormous privilege of welcoming, I was going to say the woman, but I don't have to say the woman, I will say the person that is the most powerful in the world in terms of development. She is Elisa Ferreira, who is the European Commissioner for Cohesion and Reforms for the last almost 5 years. And she is in charge of the largest, and I would say now oldest, policy for development in our planet, one that has been emulated across many parts of the world, and with an eye-watering budget of 392 billion euros for this programming period, which is the period 2021-2027. For many of you, she will need no introduction, but she has got a long and very prestigious CV, in which before she was commissioner, she worked as vice governor of the Bank of Portugal, where she joined in 2016 and became vice governor in 2017. During her tenure, she was Portugal's representative to the supervisory board of the single supervisory mechanism of the European Central Bank. And you'll be happy to know that you're not the first central banker to join us. We had Pablo Hernández de Cos on that same stage just about a year ago. Between 2004 and 2016, she was a member of the European Parliament, coordinating the group of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament's Economic and Monetary Committee, and she was rapporteur and co-rapporteur or shadow rapporteur of many key legislative files, including the six-pack and the two-pack, the BRRD, and the regulation creating the single resolution mechanisms. She was a member before that of the Portuguese National Parliament between 2002 and 2004. And if you're ever in Lisbon, please go and visit the Parliament. It's one of the most amazing parliaments I've seen in my life. And she was also Minister for Planning in Portugal, responsible already for regional policy between 1999 and 2002. Before that, she was Minister for the Environment from 1995 to 1999. So I cannot think of anyone who's better suited to be given a talk to a large share of people and students who have been who are in the Department of Geography and the Environment. She, before that, was working in the Northern Region Coordination Commission, which is a central government regional development institution, of which she was vice president from 1988 until 1992. In parallel, she was also a member of the board of the National Statistics Institute of Portugal. In terms of background, she's held a degree in economics from the University of Porto, a master's degree and a PhD from the University of Reading, so not far away, and where we have some of our former students teaching. And she is currently also, although albeit on leave, as you can imagine, with a CV, a professor at the Faculty of Economics of the University of Porto. But you haven't come here to listen to me. I think you want to hear what Elisa Ferreira has to say. So please welcome Elisa Ferreira with a big round of applause.
Okay, thank you. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, it's done.
you wanted to hide
Yeah.
for longer?
No, I was trying to see the people over there,
All right.
which I can.
So I can make it a bit lower.
Yeah, it's better because I'm not that big. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much to Andrés Rodríguez-Pose and for this invitation. And I'm very, very honored to be here. I'm very honored also to have the opportunity to exchange ideas with you and to listen to you. I had the chance, it was organized by Professor Riccardo Crescenzi and by Andrés Rodríguez-Pose to exchange with some of you also on your work, on your research. And in fact, it is really a pleasure for several reasons, because the majority of you are young people. That's what we care for, is to engage with you. The future is yours, it's not ours, or mine at least. And on the other hand, because we need more and more quality research, quality thinking, analysis, if we really want to do the right policies. And I also want to thank Andrés for this long description of what I have been doing in my life. Of course, I'm very, very young, so I did everything very fast. But anyway, I believe me that the more we do, the more we research, the more we have to work and analyze and research throughout our life and our career. And in fact, it is a great honor for me now to be in charge of this portfolio, so cohesion, at the European level. And at this level as well, we are faced with doubts, with difficulties. And this is why we just asked some colleagues, inclusive these two very well-known professors, among other people, to come and to work and to advise us under the coordination of Andrés Rodríguez-Pose. So what I'm saying here today is just kind of sharing with you, because I don't know exactly what your expertise is, but to share with you some of our policies, some of our objectives, some of our doubts, because we need everybody on board in order to progress. And in fact, the title, European Cohesion Policy as a Driver of European Integration, is in itself already a very interesting topic that was suggested to me by Andrés in particular. First, the European project, because I think the European project is something that I find amazing, because it's a group of countries that didn't conquer each other. They decided to work in a peace context, freedom context, and to promote growth, joint growth. And second, cohesion policy, because cohesion policy, from my point of view, and I share it fortunately with a lot of other people, is to a certain extent applied economic geography, but in the European context, it is in fact an area on which we believe lies a lot of the glue that keeps the whole Europe together. Why I say this? I say this because, in fact, we talk about European Union, and sometimes we disregard the fact that inside the European Union, you are talking about these 242 regions. All these regions, they are divisions of administrative divisions of countries. But if you go into the detail, if you visit each of them, you recognize that each of them has its culture, sometimes its language. Look at the graph on the right, and you see that we have 27 countries. We have 24 official languages, but it is actually also a fact, and I regret that we are not 28 member states, but there is nothing I can do about it. But in fact, with 27 member states, you also have a lot of realities that create different cultures, different attitudes, different histories. And it is important to recognize these differences. It's a union of 27 sovereign states, but it became the biggest trader in the world, a leader in what concerns green economy, and a lot of you work on environment as well. A beacon for democracy, for human rights. We try to do our best to abide by these principles. And in a way, a major standard setter in a lot of sectors. And in particular, more recently, we also assumed ourselves as having this ambition to become a leading force in climate control. Even if you consider the European Union, the contribution for the CO2 and other greenhouse gases is relatively small. It's 8-9% of the world problem. But nevertheless, Europe is attempting to develop the policies, to develop also the instruments and the technologies that can help Europe to stimulate a global effort for controlling the climate problem. And in fact, at least one achievement we had is to have guaranteed for 70 years or more stability inside Europe, peace inside Europe, a reasonable level of democratic respect. And democracy is also an aspect that builds on a lot of economic conditions. You talk about democracy, everybody talks about it, but the truth is that, in fact, if you don't have access to education, if you don't have access to health, if you don't access now even to the internet, your participation in the building of the country, in the political life of the country, is very, very reduced, is very limited. So what I was trying to tell you here is that, in fact, Europe is made of a lot of diversity. We talk about each of these regions has often very strong administrations. Let's imagine what happens in Spain or what happens in Germany, where there is really a big power at the regional level. Other regions have a very weak autonomy, and countries are very centralized. But each of these regions, and I've been traveling quite a lot, and often people, they say that instead of saying that they are, for instance, from Italy, they say that they are from Basilicata, or they are from Puglia, or they are from Asturias in Spain, or they are from Basque Country, or they are from Bavaria. Because there is all this background of history, of traditions, of identity. There are parts of Europe that are spread. We have the outermost regions, some of them in the Atlantic coast, in the Americas, in the Indian Ocean, small areas, but nevertheless, they are part of this group. And we could, I think, say very easily that this is a project that is unity in diversity. And this diversity calls for a very special care, a very special attention when we are taking policies that cover, in theory, the whole Union. And if we go a little bit back, I would say that in Europe, probably more than anywhere else, geography matters. Geography has a lot of importance. A statement of only 20 years ago, when we're saying okay, geography has disappeared and history doesn't matter anymore. I think, quoting Mark Twain, rumors of the death of geography or of the death of history have been greatly exaggerated, because in fact it matters, and it matters even more and more each day. Because economic geography has regained this power in our everyday life, also the interest on how to address the diversity of the economy, of the languages. Certain countries have several languages inside them. This requires a very, very special approach. And so what I wanted to tell you here is that when we are talking about European Union, we are talking about all this diversity, all these different patterns that are located in different places. This, on the other hand, is not just, a theoretical issue. This is a very practical thing. Because now I will show you another two maps. And in the left-hand side map, you have GDP per head in the different regions. So it's not only that the different regions are, and here we have, the pink, the dark pink, means that the GDP per head of these regions are lower than the average, and the darker the pink, the stronger the pink, the lower the level of development. And in the green, the strongest green, the more dynamic the region is, measured by something that is not, it requires being questioned, but that is usually the proxy for the welfare level of a certain region. And so you see that you have here a big center that is relatively or very prosperous. And then as you move away from this green banana in the center, you go into the periphery, you have less and less economic dynamism. This matters a lot. And it matters a lot because, and sometimes this goes even inside certain countries. If you look at Italy, you have the north and you have the south. Even if you look at Poland, you see the east and you see the west. In Germany, you see the east and you see the west. So in fact, there are lots of different levels of development. And the scale of the differences can be quite substantial, with certain regions performing with the higher levels of GDP per capita. So they have GDP that is over 50% or even more of the average, whereas you have certain regions, and you see here in the eastern part, in Bulgaria or in Romania, in parts of Romania, parts of Bulgaria, you see, in fact, very, very low levels of development, sometimes with 1/3 or little more than 1/3 than the European average. If you look at the right-hand map, then you have another interpretation of the situation, because you see the change, the average change of this GDP, the GDP growth, yearly growth rates on average between 2001 and 2019. So 19 years, how in the last years, broadly speaking, how the evolution, what is happening. And you see, comparing the two graphs, that in fact, the less performing regions of the eastern part of Europe, grosso modo, yes, they still have a lot of work to do, but they have been growing quite fast. The deeper the green, the higher the level of growth. Whereas you look at prosperous regions, regions that are relatively well, like France, for instance, or like that in the other map are, I mean, in the higher than the average, and they are stagnant. So stagnant means having a dark pink. The very, very deep pink is recession. They are growing negatively. And the mild, the almost white means about growing very, very at a very slow rate. I mean, 1% or around that. And then you have the gradients in between. So if you look at this, you have a picture of what is happening in Europe. So there are regions, and the work done by Rodríguez-Pose and by and other colleagues shows very clearly that in fact we have a phenomenon. One phenomenon is the level at which you are. The other phenomenon is if you are getting out of the situation or if you are stagnant. And you can be stagnant at a high level of development, or you can start losing power. You can be stagnant at an intermediary level or at a very low level. And you see, comparing the two maps, you see exactly the kind of picture I was trying to share with you. And this has a lot of consequences. So these regions that are stagnant, we can call it trapped, and the literature calls it trapped, is also reflected in the inherent conditions for growth. Because if you look at the regional competitiveness, and here again, if you are very competitive, and competitiveness mixes a lot of ingredients, like the capacity of the people that live there, like the quality of institutions, like the conditions to create a business. You have in green and sometimes dark green, the most competitive areas, so that they have the kind of environment on which you can build a sustainable and future-oriented growth. Whereas in the pinkish areas, you have a very low level, very little energy to be able to grow and to be able to get out of it. So this competitiveness index confirms what we have seen before, as you can also confirm in the regional innovation chart, in which again, you have the blue, dark blue, navy blue, are sources of areas where you have a high concentration of universities, of technology, of research institutes, and I mean this environment, this dynamic environment. Whereas if you go into the brown, you have a very, very low level of innovation capacity. We call it emerging innovators, in the sense that we hope that these regions will be able to grow faster in their innovative capacity. And you also see that, for instance, if you look here in the right part of the graph, you have the internal imbalances inside some countries. And you see, for instance, that France, if you have the dark dot is the innovation capacity in the capital. You have a line, a green line, that shows you the average level. And then you have the different regions inside a country. So the divergence is not only perceived across countries, but inside certain countries. And the sequence goes from the high level to the low level of innovation capacity of the different member states. So you have Sweden in the highest level is Sweden. I don't know if you can read the letters underneath, but the first one is Sweden, the last one is Romania. So the capital of these different countries has the different capacities for innovation. going from very high levels, particularly in the northern countries of Europe. And the last ones on the right side are Bulgaria and Romania. They are the last ones. And in the middle, you have France, for instance. France is here. It's this one. And you can see that there is a massive difference between the innovation capacity in the capital and in the most remote regions, which is a problem and an issue because innovation is in fact an indicator of the dynamism or capacity to come out of these traps. So the ingredients that we have in these regions. So these divides, these differences are a major social and or pose major social and development challenges, and it's this that we try to address. And we try to address, in particular, after we published 2 years ago what we called, and some of these maps and graphs come from there, we have got for every 2-3 years, we published a kind of diagnosis of what is the evolution of the different regions in Europe. And we published 2 years ago the 8th Cohesion Report. If you go into the internet, 8th Cohesion Report. And we realized that, in fact, as some of the theory was already suggesting, that we have regions that are at different levels, and then regions that they are losing their energy to get out because they are somehow trapped for quite a while. We have, in fact, this analysis on which I call on researchers and on you to identify what are the causes of this trapping, and because through there, probably we can organize the policy instruments to get them out of the trap and to make sure that everybody, doesn't matter where the person lives, can really, participate and share the welfare of the whole area. We are looking at the business ecosystem, and usually the weakest regions show, on top of limited innovation capacity, a fragile business ecosystem, insufficient organization, poor managerial capacity, very weak public administration, and all this creates this kind of stagnation. But this is just a hint for you in relation to another aspect that we have studied, and that combined with the previous one is quite telling. What we did in this study was, in fact, to try to analyze what is the situation of the different regions in terms of qualified, talented people, and to analyze the change in the presence of these people in regions. And what happens is that a lot of regions are suffering on top of everything else because of everything that I said before. They are losing their most qualified people, citizens, creating this brain drain, this flow of people, which is another serious problem. And the more red the region is, the highest is the problem associated with this loss of in particular, young. We were working more or less, the period between 20 and 30 years, qualified people with tertiary education. What was the situation in one moment was the situation after some years later. And in fact, we realized that a lot of regions are losing their best, either to the central regions that are developing or even to immigrate outside Europe. So in fact, on top of the economic trap, we have a talent development trap. And these regions that are red here, they have a very serious risk of not having the ingredients to catch up, to get out of the trap, because they miss the energy of young and talented people. 1 in 3 regions in Europe, 1 in 3 in each 3 Europeans, so 1/3 of the Europeans lives in a region which has seen hardly any growth since the year 2000. Now, if you see the paper that was just published 2 days ago, in which Professor Riccardo Crescenzi and others participated, and that was coordinated by Rodríguez-Pose, you'll have much more information on the discussion of these issues than the ones that I'm bringing here today. So I strongly suggest that you check on it, that you visit it. But previously we had already and some of the work done by people like them show also that there is a relationship, a significant correlation between regions that are stagnant, including all these dimensions, and the rejection of the system, so to speak. So the correlation exists between regions that are in fact not growing. And not growing means what? Means that families invest in the training and education of their children. They invest a lot, and then these children or young generation, they move away, and this is a frustration. And if the region starts losing the dynamic and the power, of course the business closes. There is only old people there, and it's quite frustrating. So in fact, what is happening is that also the political consistency of Europe requires that we address these issues, and that we address them in a way that really keeps Europe together. And this is what I was mentioning in the initial title of this talk. Of course, how to address this is an issue. How to change. Some of these regions, and in particular, the problem is particularly serious in the areas that have been rich, and particularly, for instance, in areas of France that were very industrialized, and they are losing, the factories are closing, people are becoming jobless. So this is really, a matter of frustration, of disenchantment. And you vote in one party and another party, and after a while you vote for someone that says, I'll protect you, I'll keep your job, I'll keep your house, doesn't matter. Of course, this is often empty in terms of content, but it works because it gives an answer to a very complicated kind of feeling that people have. So this content builds slowly, takes a long time to materialize. But you look at Italy and southern Italy on one hand, and you look at Northern Europe, and you understand much better why people vote. And it is interesting to note as well that people that were departing from a higher level of development, so they were rich, and now they don't see progress there, these are much more reluctant to believe that the future will bring them the stability they dream of, than the ones that are still, benefiting from some growth or some support. And so you see, for instance, in Western Europe, the belief that, okay, we came from such a low level of poverty that there is hope. But very quickly, this can change into a disenchantment, because if it stays for too long, it doesn't work. So the truth is that in 2003, the Eurosceptic parties accounted for 7% of the vote in Europe. But by 2023, the estimate is that we'll see what the elections for the European Parliament will give. But in 2023, this figure had been multiplied by 4. So 28% of the citizens were prepared to vote into Eurosceptic. And sometimes this is also divided in hard and soft Euroscepticism. But when it is hard, it's also against democracy or against the functioning of the whole society. So we have, in fact, to create these conditions to change the situation, to keep Europe together. And in fact, the policies exist in spite of these results. And the situation would have been much worse if the policy that I'm sharing was not there. And then I'll give you some figures, but already in 1957, when the Treaty of Rome was established, it was written that reducing the differences between the various regions and the backwardness of less favored regions was one of the objectives of European integration. But the argument, I mean, this recognition gave origin to a policy that is cohesion policy. And this cohesion policy, since the beginning, was considered a crucial element to keep Europe together, because, in fact, Europe adopted a model of free competition, free exchange, free movement of goods in the beginning, and progressively free movement of people, free movement of capital. So if you have free movements, and at the same time you have huge divergences in the different areas, you are bound to create a system in which there is a lot of discontent, because there is the winner takes it all. So it is very difficult to imagine that without a policy that really compensates the stress that is done on the different regions, this could have been holding together for so long. So, in fact, also there is in the theory, in the economic theory, this argument that, and some of you, the ones that have addressed economic issues, you recognize the theory that there are mechanisms that rebalance growth. They rebalance through the price mechanism. So when labor is scarce, so in theory, the places where labor would be moving out, the cost of labor would go up, so salaries would go up. So by the end of the day, people would move there. And the reverse would happen in relation to the movement of capital. And so we could hope that this would work. But in fact, the reality shows that it doesn't work like this. Probably it's important, before we adopt a theory, to go through the assumptions of the theory. And for instance, it was interesting when Tony Van Abels addressed it, in the sense that there are lots of market failures, because the salaries are not set at the regional level. So the salaries don't go up and down like this. Also, there are lots of frictions for companies to move, because companies want to be located within clusters, within ecosystems, in which they have the proximity of good labor force, good amenities, other companies that have relations or don't with them. And interest rates, they are not that flexible. They are set, in this case, for a lot of countries at the level of the central bank, so European Central Bank. So, and migration is a costly decision. So people don't move just like that because there is a better salary there. So the kind of aspects that really interfere in all these mechanisms, they really show that on the opposite, the initial reaction is to go for agglomerates of scale. So you see more and more people and more companies and the most qualified people moving to the high-performance centers. And in fact, you see that labor is coming out. And only when you create opportunities, business opportunities, job opportunities in those places, they will go back, not through the normal mechanisms that we were expecting from the theory and the assumptions of the theory, but rather when there is an external impulse that really creates or recreates a dynamism that attracts these people. So we need, in a way, to address all these regions, and in particular to act before it happens. So going and analyzing what are the assets and liabilities of each region, and trying to match them with the external activities and with the international value chains in order to attract new activities and to train people for that purpose is what we are asking to see and trying to analyze. And in fact, the book that Riccardo Crescenzi and Oliver Harman just published touches exactly upon this, how to prepare regions in order that these regions can get out by tapping on the opportunities that exist in the international business and create these good jobs. It is very important, and I'm quoting, crucial institutional and informational linkages necessary to connect to specific sectors and to specific value chains. I'm quoting from your texts. But this is a very complex task, and it requires that at level of each region, you have, in fact, the institutional capacity, the quality of the university and researchers in order to be able to foster the kind of strategy that, that delivers. This policy that exists since the origin of the treaty, but it has been revised and reinforced and so forth, it's in fact trying to fill these market failures. So if the market doesn't rebel us automatically, we have got to do something about it. And in fact, the European Union has a very small budget. Sometimes we forget this. The budget of the European Union is 1/3 of the total wealth, 1% of the total wealth of the area. So it's really seed money. It's 1% of GDP. But 1/3 of this GDP is used in the agricultural policy. 1/3 is for all the other things that Europe does, and 1/3 is dedicated exactly to cohesion. And it's very interesting to understand that with this, almost 400 billion euros for 7 years, and that is about 340 billion pounds or 430 billion dollars, around this value. In fact, what we try to do is to use the money to, in a proportionate way to the needs of the regions. We assume that the richer regions, that they can really organize themselves in order to support their own development. And so the weaker the region, the higher the value that is allocated to that region in terms of support per capita, per inhabitant. And then we concentrate that necessarily in the weakest regions of Europe, and we finance what happens there according to a plan that is negotiated on the basis of a 7-year period, exactly with the European Commission. Historically, when the country is in a very low level of development, we tend to focus on basic infrastructures. Progressively, we move, or we foster the countries and regions to move into higher level and more sophisticated value-added investments. So we move from supporting bridges, roads, water systems, progressively to go into support to research, support to innovation, support to risk capital, support to academic work, relationship between the companies and the innovative centers, on high-level skills. And at the same time, of course, organizing the transition towards a greener and more sustainable and more technological society. So, in fact, in particular, we work with, and we have an extra funding for those regions that depend a lot on carbon emitting industries, because for them the transition is harder. So we have an extra funding for them. So we support basically training, infrastructures. There is a variety of issues. Now, what are we talking about? What is the impact? I didn't hide, and I wanted to share with you what is the picture now. But in fact, it is important to note that if we look at what happened during these years, cohesion policy has added over 0.5 percentage point every year to long-term growth. In particular, in weaker regions, it has added more than 1% to the normal natural growth. If you look at the countries that joined the European Union after 2004, so 10 new countries, and I'm talking about Poland and Romania and then Croatia later on, and Baltics, I mean, all these newcomers, we are talking about an average GDP per capita at that moment when they joined around 50%, 52% on average. Now they all have, on average again, 77% of the European GDP per head. And there is a calculation that was presented in this report, which I find even more telling. The population across Europe living in countries that had less than 75% of the average in terms of wealth, of GDP per capita again. It was in the year 2000, 24.6%, and it is 5% now, 5.3%. So you see the convergence of the different countries, even if the situation still has a lot of challenges. But at the regional level, the figures are much less enthusiastic, which shows that in a lot of countries, when the average grows, it's because inside there is a huge difference between the capital normally, or the most developed pole, and the most backward regions. And if you take the regions, the progress is much less evident. It comes from 29% of the population in those areas. And now, I mean, in 2023, it was 27%. So there is a progress, but it's not as evident as at the level of member states. So this is to share with you some of the results, some of the remaining problems. But in fact, it is also true that according to recent model simulations, the open market, the larger market, if we manage to rebalance at the same time the capacity to participate, because the idea is not to transfer money as a kind of subsidy, it's to create conditions for each region to be able to play the game and to get a bit of the opportunities opened by the internal market. And if we look back, the EU as a whole, because also the countries that in theory don't need support, they benefit because they enlarge the market. If you think of Poland, a lot of companies, I mean, they were suppliers of the works that were done in Poland or in Romania. And now foreign direct investment is moving into those countries. So they are benefiting. So it's a gain. But it's a big gain. But the gain is not reflected in contributions to the budget and income that is transferred through the budget. Budget, as I told you, is we're talking about 30% of 1%. So that's of the total GDP. But in fact, our estimates on the period 2014-2020 was that the EU as a whole gained an additional almost 1% of GDP, and 1.3 million jobs were created. And in fact, as Andres was mentioning, we have the feeling that this kind of place-based approach to economics and to development is gaining some support. We are in contact with China, for instance. China started a program that is called supporting 592 poor counties across China. Also, we see something of this place-based in the US Inflation Reduction Act that looks at territories. And we are exchanging with a lot of countries that really look with a lot of interest into this support. The World Bank, for instance, calls it the biggest convergence machine in the world, because it is in fact a very significant kind of thing. And if you ask people recognize that the quality of life in the different countries and regions, even in the most remote ones, has changed completely after accession to the European Union. But nevertheless, challenges are there, looming. You see climate, you see in Europe a very serious problem that is shown here in this last map. This is the demographic change. So Europe is losing population. In 2050, we will have less, if nothing is done, we have less 35 million citizens in working age. And you see geopolitical challenges. Let's see what happens. You see also the Green Revolution, where Rodríguez-Pose and others have done also the mapping of where things are going to have a more serious impact in the development of the different areas. There is this digital and industrial revolution, new sources of energy. So lots of forces coming from outside, and so lots of impacts that are very often asymmetric. And one thing is also evident, that is any horizontal policy, neutral policy, is not neutral at all, because according to the characteristics of different regions, it affects regions and economies differently. So there is nothing like one standard approach. And that's why, thinking of enlargement, the more we need a solid cohesion policy, because in fact these countries, they have a very low level of GDP per capita, and there is also a change in mentality, in institutional management, that it requires a lot of adaptation. I will end by quoting Jacques Delors, someone I admire a lot, was president of the Commission for 10 years, 10 important years. And already in 1980, Jacques Delors, he died unfortunately last December, but he was saying that further advances in the European project, deepening like we did with the single currency or with the Green Deal, or enlargement, and we are preparing to enlarge again, requires further advances in solidarity and in cohesion. So today's Europe is in fact a testament to the success of Delors' vision. Last year, we celebrated 30 years of the single market. This year, we celebrate 20 years of the biggest enlargement, so 2004, and 3 more countries joined since then. And I think Delors' vision has managed to keep us together. Of course, challenges are there. Of course, there is a lot of work to do. We count on you also, on your capacity to research, your capacity to find what can trigger the solution at the different regions, because no one size fits all at all. But having said this, I think we need, for a true democracy, for a true European citizenship, we need, in fact, that everybody can share the general wealth, and that everybody, wherever they are, can share the opportunities that are opened by such a big and vivid market. So thank you very much. I took a bit longer, but I wanted really to share with you as much as possible on this for me, very interesting dossier. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Ferreira, for a very, very interesting and thought-provoking talk. Now we have our very own Professor Riccardo Crescenzi, who's going to be acting as the discussant. For those of you, I mean, many of you would know Riccardo already, but for those of you who don't know him, he is someone who shows that talent is spread everywhere in the European community, but very often talent also flocks to the biggest cities. Not that he comes from a small city, but he was, for a period that for me didn't seem that long ago, but it might seem a long time ago for him, or sitting where many of you are, doing the same courses. He's got an MSc in an economist from Roma 3. He did an MSc in local economic development from the LSE, and then he finished his PhD in Roma 3 and was a postdoc researcher at the European University Institute in Italy before coming here. In that period, he has made a stratospheric career because he became a professor very soon, and not just that, he has become one of the foremost experts in the fields of innovation, in the fields of foreign direct investment, and the fields of global value chains, among others. So, Riccardo, the floor is yours, and I wish you a very interesting dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andres, for your introduction, for the kind invite to be here with you today. Thank you very much to the Cañada Blanch Centre for having organized this event, and thanks, Commissioner Ferreira, for your inspiring talk. When you mentioned the first enlargement, and when you mentioned the 2004 enlargement, and you mentioned it's already like 20 years ago, this reminded me what Andres mentioned, that I've been already working on these topics for almost two decades since my undergraduate. So we had similar thought. Notwithstanding this, notwithstanding having worked for some time on these topics, it's very difficult to discuss Elisa Ferreira's talk, because it's really like inspiring and profoundly insightful, I think. So your vision, your analysis of the opportunities and challenges for European regions is truly spot on. But also, I think what really always inspires me is your commitment to address these complex challenges, acknowledging the complexity of the challenges, and having a role in addressing these challenges. So I think your vision for the future is both ambitious on the one hand, but also achievable, having a clear pathway towards impact. And I think with leaders like you, it's really we feel that Europe is really in safe hands in achieving important results and dealing with the challenges. When you joined the Commission was 2019, so a very topical year, a very important and challenging year. So you had really to deal with very, very big challenges for the EU. So I mostly share your reflections on the diagnosis of the challenges and the big problems of the EU regions. What I would like to do to try and ignite, using a word our chair likes, in order to ignite the debate, I would like to discuss a couple of points before leaving the floor to the many students and colleagues that are present here for the debate, and I'm sure they want to ask questions to the Commissioner. A few points on the challenges, but also the opportunities that come from the current landscape. And first of all, clearly, we are not alone, in the sense that Europe is facing the challenges that you mentioned in your final slide, the green transition, the digital transition, challenges to democracy. So a wide set of challenges in a highly interconnected world. So it's very important to understand what other continents, what is happening in other continents. And you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, for example. So there are important lessons, but it's very important to see how what happens across the globe impacts what happens in Europe and what happens in the regions of Europe. And this is particularly important because what happens on the ground sometimes is not what you would expect. It's not like as intuitive as one might think by simply looking at the theory. So sometimes there is a contradiction between the theory and what we see on the ground. So it's very important to analyze and understand the complexity of this phenomenon. I was thinking about the changing global landscape and the growing geopolitical tensions that surround Europe, the war. And very often when we think about the reshoring phenomenon, for example, the idea of European firms bringing activities back to Europe as an opportunity to bring back jobs to Europe. This is certainly an opportunity. There might be opportunities. However, academic research is showing us that there are big challenges because sometimes what leaves foreign countries is not the same that comes back to Europe. So sometimes we destroy jobs in foreign countries in order to bring activities closer to us. But what we bring back is mostly automation. We are mostly replacing cheap labor in less developed countries with automation, with capital-intensive processes, new technologies in Europe. And this is a challenge because this might generate productivity, might generate opportunities in Europe, but opportunities without jobs. Or with very different types of jobs, when these changes generate jobs, might generate jobs of very different types vis-a-vis the one that we are able to fulfill with the type of skills that we have available in Europe. So this is like a first big challenge. We are not alone. There is a lot of impacts that we feel at the local level in Europe. But in order to deal with these challenges, we really need to be ready and we really need to change sometimes the skills and the endowment of skills that we have in the EU region. But also, sometimes these challenges, together with opportunities, come from changes in the configuration of the EU. And I think about the enlargement and the perspective of the enlargement and how and to what extent the impacts of the forthcoming enlargement will impact not only the regions that neighbor the new member states of the EU, but also a wider set of regions that are connected to the future new member states through very complex supply chains. And so that's where impacts, positive or negative impacts, might materialize in places that we don't expect or that in previous enlargement we didn't experience, or we experience in very different ways. So it's very important to understand how what happens in one part of the EU, what happens at the borders or at the new borders of the EU impacts very different places in new and renewed manners. So there is the issue of connectivity. There is the issue of a changing global landscape, but also changing borders of the EU. And then there is there are the issues that you mentioned linked with the green transition. Again, here we are not alone. There is the issue of how we can adapt to the green transition, how all places in Europe can contribute to a sustainable future, and how sustainability can be achieved in all places, generating opportunities at the same time, making sure that we create this sense of togetherness that is so central to the idea of cohesion. And again, here we really need to understand what are the mechanisms, how we can bring to the places that are less advantaged in terms of productivity, in terms of technologies, how we can generate opportunities there. What type of policies can really be mobilized in order to generate opportunities, to make sure that the green transition can generate opportunities in all places. And this is the additional point, trying to understand what are the policies that work in practice. And I think this is the evidence that you were calling for and that the LSE is trying to contribute. The idea of understanding, okay, what works in practice, what are the policies that can make a difference, and can make a difference in places where capacities, where institutional conditions are indeed very different. Let me just mention an example. You mentioned the issue of human capital, the problem of talent, the problem of lack of opportunities in particular places. And this reminds me very much of the big challenges that, for example, the Italian Mezzogiorno, that Southern Italy has been facing for several decades. And the issue there is, it's not about only generating the skills. It's not only about generating human capital, because then you try and invest in human capital locally, but you cannot retain the human capital. You only reinforce the brain drain. So it's very important to understand how we can put in place policies that work. Sometimes the issue and the evidence are trying to understand the policies that have been implemented in these places tell us that you need to think about a portfolio of policies, thinking about what the supply of skills, so when we train people, but also the demand of these skills on the side of firms. So how the ecosystem can absorb the skill and retain the skills and put those skills in a good use. Otherwise, we might be able, even through incentives, to retain people, but we might have people that have very high skills ending up to do very low skill jobs. So what we call a vertical in terms of the quality of jobs, or a type of horizontal mismatch, by which I am a doctor, but I work in the public administration and I just do a job for someone who would need a different degree. So it's very important to make sure that we look at the tools that work in practice that can ensure that human capital is put at the best possible use. And finally, like moving from capital, from human capital into productive capital and investment, it's very important to think about policies that work to create the connectivity that we mentioned before, leveraging global value chains, leveraging foreign direct investments. Can we do that through public policies? In London, we know that it is possible to leverage investments to generate productivity, innovation, jobs, and then foreign direct investments and skills work together and form like a local base and self-reinforcing sort of mixture. The issue is how to make sure that this virtuous circle can be reproduced elsewhere. And again, it's very important to think about practical tools that on the ground, in a simple, enforceable manner, can generate change at the local level in order to ignite, in order to get started with this process. So to do this, we need definitely like knowledge. That is something that universities can provide, but definitely what is needed are also more data. It's also more information, more transparency, for example, on the expenditure, how policies are implementing, making data. And the Commission has made very, very significant progress in this area, but it's very important to continue in this direction in order to make information available to make informed decisions along the lines that the Commission has suggested. Let me close my discussion, and hopefully open the discussion on a positive note. When we have done research on the link between the EU cohesion policy and voting patterns, thinking about the forthcoming elections, looking in particular at the most important case where citizens were asked to vote specifically on the EU, looking at the Brexit referendum, what we have found is that people indeed tend to vote more for the EU, more for the process of integration, not where they have received more funds. So it's not about transfers, it's not about charity, it's not about transferring money, that's about impact. So people tended to vote more Remain, where there was a combination of exposure to the EU, so indeed being in receipt of EU funds, like some regions in the EU, in the UK did before Brexit, but at the same time seeing change, being able to see a positive change in the living conditions of the people in receipt, of the places in receipt of the money. Just seeing money being spent without impact, without change in your conditions, in particular, in this case, we are looking at employment opportunities. So this idea of the future, it's something that can backfire, because I see that EU resources are transformed into policies of waste rather than policies that generate opportunities. This is to say that impactful policies and evidence-based impacts that generate change, that generate opportunities are fundamental, not only to the future of cohesion policy, but to the future of Europe and of Western democracies more generally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Riccardo. Elisa Ferreira, do you have any initial reactions?
I think everything that Riccardo has mentioned makes a lot of sense. In fact, I think this issue of jobs is an issue. Is a very important issue when you substitute the manpower for automation. Yeah, there is a big impact. Of course, the estimates that we have in Europe of both the greening and the digital show that about 2 million jobs are supposed to be created. The issue that we have to address is where are they going to be created? Because of course you create a lot of jobs when you start researching on new technologies for renewables, or when you introduce new techniques to manage a company by robots or by artificial intelligence. But where does this happen? Where are these jobs created? That is one issue. The other issue is this relationship with the outside world. And in fact, I think that for too long, Europe was kind of one of the few areas, big continents in Europe that didn't have a strategy to participate in the globalized economy. What do I mean by this? I mean, a lot of importers were more powerful than producers in a way. Production was going through a lot of constraints internally, from respect for human rights, payments, labor welfare, environment constraints, and then imports done all over the world. They were coming in and they were really competing because the labor costs were lower, the costs, it was a very different kind of environment on which this production was made. I think this helped to improve the quality of life in millions and millions of citizens of the world. But the truth is that the internal impact was really a massive destruction of industries in a lot of countries. Also, when there is enlargement, we shall not hide that there is a kind of loss of competitiveness of previous benefited countries with, for instance, foreign direct investment. All these areas with problems that are in the west of Europe, all the FDI, foreign direct investment that was there, I won't say all, but a lot of the FDI or new FDI that was supposed to come to these countries, it moved into the newcomers because in fact the cost of labor was lower, and people were very much better prepared, they were very efficient, and the proximity to the central markets was higher, even from a cultural proximity with the German area, for instance. So, I mean, we have got to take all these elements into account when we are addressing what are the other aspects that really often work against convergence, and that cohesion policy tries to rebalance, but these forces, they are really very, very dramatic. After COVID, things changed a bit, and I think with the recognition that some of the most performing industries located in Europe could not work if the global chains were interrupted, like it happened with COVID, was really an alarm clock for Europe. And now there is much more concern about keeping inside Europe at least a substantial part of the production process, so that really there is, I mean, a bit of independence from this globalized world, like all the other countries do. So this aspect, I find it very important, very relevant, as it is relevant the fact that we have a currency that is a strong currency, and so often it is not that easy to compete with more weaker currencies. I mean, the last move of of the Inflation Reduction Act and other subsidies and other practices, particularly in China and the United States, also pose a very important question. What kind of global economy are we going to have? Do we manage to have a kind of minimum common standards in what saving the globe at least is concerned, and try to agree on minimum practices? Or are we going really to kill each other through subsidies and barriers so that we don't lose completely the control over the economy and jobs? These issues are really looming behind, but they are the most important, probably, aspects that also need to be brought into the picture if you want to understand what is happening.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. One of the cherished traditions we have at the LSE is that every person invited to give a talk, no matter how important, they always have to answer questions from our students. And Elisa Ferreira has kindly agreed to do so. And just remember, I'm going to ask questions from the floor, but when I ask for a question, it's not for a statement. A question should start by what, why, how, or to what extent, and finish with a question mark. So please go ahead. When you ask a question, just give us your name. What are you doing if you're a student at the LSE? And just for Elisa Ferreira, we're going to accumulate questions in groups of 3 so we can maximize the time. Yes, Andres, please start.
Thank you so much.
Just stand up, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Andres Bautista. I am a student in the Master of Local Economic Development. So Andres and Riccardo are my professors. I have 3 questions, sorry, but this opportunity is unique.
Choose one, please, so we can hear more voices.
I will ask 3, please don't. It's unique, please. First, for example, what happened when the European Commission have a reform in a specific region?
Yeah,
it works.
Yeah.
Okay, what happened when the European Commission think about some specific reform in some specific region, but the region think that is not important or doesn't matter?
Yeah.
The second question is what happened with how you can deal with when some countries don't invest enough money in the reforms in the fee for the European Commission. And the last question is what according with the European experience, what is your advice for get some similar cohesion or integration in region, for example, in Latin America or East Asia? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Even though there are 3, we're going to accumulate a few more. More hands? Yes, over there, Guillermo, please. Yes, just wait for the microphone, please. It's coming.
Guillermo, also from Local Economic Development. And my question is if in this cohesion policy, are you considering also have considerable investment on improving institutions in the regions of Europe? Because we've seen evidence showing that it doesn't matter that we invest a lot in this lagging behind regions. If institutions are not good, then probably it's not going to work. So I don't know how you plan to address that through the cohesion policy.
And third question, Helena, please.
Hi, I'm Helena. I'm also in local economic development. I think similar to what Andres asked, how do you make sure that cohesion policy is prioritized, especially as we see governments in Europe becoming more populist?
So, Elisa Ferreira, please,
Yes.
the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Important questions, all of them. In relation to reforms, this is a big issue because it's not easy to make the trade-off between respecting democratic choices and forcing in something. I mean, in the past, not so long ago, at a certain point, the financial crisis forced some adjustments that were imposed by the instability in the global financial markets in relation to sovereign debt. It was really a problem inside Europe, as you may recall. And this forced a lot of new legislation, by means of which countries had to go back to another kind of compliance with, in particular, targets in terms of deficit, in terms of debt, because I mean, otherwise they would have a contagion effect, killing inclusive the common currency. So as everything is interconnected, and so if one of them starts not being accepted as a reliable debtor in the international market, that can affect the whole of Europe. In that context, we started a kind of procedure that we call the European semester, in which each year there is a kind of opinion on the country and what the country should do. More and more we are trying to, to incorporate inside these recommendations, these country-specific recommendations, aspects that relate to other issues, rather than only the aspects that were relating to deficit macroeconomic variables. In the recent exceptional support that relates also to cohesion, but it's not a pure cohesion agenda. So for the first time, when we had the pandemic, the European Commission proposed and the member states agreed to go into the international market and to borrow. And for the first time, the 1% budget of the European Union was increased. It's almost the double of the normal budget. Through, it was in particular, more concretely, 800 billion euros that were borrowed in the financial sector with the guarantee of the member states. And with this, there was a special support to member states in which some reforms were suggested, and the payments would be transferred to the member states once the member state would do this transformation, these changes. And this worked for a lot of member states, because it was a stimulus, and also it was some of the reforms and are costly. On the side of this, we have since 10 years or so, we have another entity, another DG, another Directorate General that is called, and it's very interesting to speak with them as well, that is led by someone that some of you know, Mario Nava, that is also someone that comes from Bocconi University and all that, but he's a general director, and they support member states when member states want to do reforms. Imagine that you need to reform the education system. So sometimes they do support directly if they have the knowledge. If not, they pay consultants that, and among these consultants, we hire the work of the OECD or World Bank, or even certain universities, if there is this capacity to give this advice, and if the advice is welcomed by the member state. So all the European member states have asked in the last 2 years for this kind of technical support. But in fact, it's voluntary in that case. Similar examples across the world. I mentioned some. In fact, there are several attempts of integrated areas, in particular in Latin America, as you mentioned. I think there are very special aspects in the countries that probably need to be addressed before there is a real movement forward. Because from trade policy that if you have the same type of specialization across a lot of economies, then if you open trade, the winner takes it all. So in a way, also there are problems of distance, of similar markets. So I think it requires much more research, much more analysis in order to make it work. Because sometimes the political will is there, but the capacity really to have a gain. And when we talk about these trade gains and the welfare triangles, we should research more on how this gain is shared across the different economies that participate, because that is sometimes the crucial thing. Everybody has got to gain something. So I would suggest that you develop this kind of thing, because we see that the free trade creates value added, but who gains from it? I mean, this calls for a lot of work. I already replied by answering this a little bit what you were saying, because in fact, regions often lack the institutional capacity. And it is in particular through this other DG reform that we are trying to go down to the regional level, but it is not easy. It is not easy, and it's a field that I'm trying to incentivize, and also asking member states in these country recommendations that they don't over-centralize the policies, because often when they are very centralized, if they are not decentralized, then at the central level, they cannot really understand the different characteristics of different regions, and so they don't give the appropriate answer necessarily. The weaker the country, the more this happens. At the same time, the capitals have a huge lobbying capacity. Governments are sieging in the capitals, and so I mean, it's the big universities, it's the big banks, it's the big companies that really often are more visible when you have to devise a policy. And also there is an internal debate in certain countries saying, okay, if we want to compete, better that we concentrate everything in the capital and leave the rest of the territory. And from my own experience, this often doesn't work, because what happens is that you leave the rest of the territory absolutely empty. They don't contribute to the overall welfare. People move to the capital, but then the congestion costs create such a big inefficiency in the capital that even the value added tends to go into a asymptotic kind of way. So it grows initially, but then it goes, and then probably it even declines, because the costs of pollution, the costs of traffic, the costs of the real estate, the housing problem creates the instability of people that cannot find a proper house. This creates a lot of costs in the big capitals. And so if you look around and if you look at the most performing countries, often they have a multipolar approach. So they have different urban centers, which gives a lot more resilience. And sometimes this is even strategic, but you have got to have this kind of understanding from the government, from the country as such. And also I would add that sometimes they believe that cohesion policy is European competence and that they can do whatever. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but some countries, they don't take cohesion as one of among the priorities of their internal policy. And this creates a lot of inefficiency, apart from disenchantment with a lot of people. Then populism, let's see what happens. In fact, one of the aspects that we are trying to do is to make this policy visible. And it is true that sometimes, even if the policy is behind the health center that was created, the roads, the university, the research center, as it is done in partnership with the member state and with the region or the entity, they put a little bit of money and we put the rest. We put much more if there is a weak region. But when there is inauguration, they often forget to say that this was Europe behind, that it was solidarity of Europe, even when the politicians are very pro-European. But, you know, I mean, they have to be elected. And so if they can forget something, it's okay. This we are trying really to make it more visible, but it is true that sometimes people take some decisions because they are, I mean, furious with this or that. They can't find the culprit for that, and then they vote against. But the consequence of voting against without understanding what is the alternative doesn't work. And I'm very glad that a lot of countries, in fact, are desperate to join the European Union. And let's look at Ukrainians. They are really, I mean, I had a lot of talks with the Ukrainians, and they really see Europe as their hope. And it's not just Ukraine. A lot of other countries are willing to join because they see the massive stability, progress, and value added that Europe can bring to them. But we'll see. The ones that are inside usually are not aware of how Europe is perceived from outside. So, okay, I don't want to go further.
Okay. We are beyond our time, but I'm going to allow just one round of questions as no one is moving. Douglas first. Yeah. Douglas.
Hi, thank you. Douglas Bonisa is here at the Cañada Blanch. So 2 questions, actually, very briefly. So the first one is in terms of enlargement, because you mentioned the case of Ukraine. And, well, there was a document was linked some months ago, a meeting for the council, which talk about the budget of the cohesion budget that you apply, 61 billion euros to be channeled towards Ukraine. So 9 countries, particularly East Europe, they'll no longer qualify for cohesion funds. So my question is, would the enlargement also mean a change the methodology or the criteria how the funds are allocated, the cohesion funds are allocated? And also the final question would be in terms of reallocation of firms towards the union, if you would say something in terms of fiscal policies, because what you see is not a regional policy, a national policy, but countries have the autonomy of the fiscal policies, and you kind of see a certain ratio to the bottom in the sense of, well, certain countries have very low corporative tax rates. So wouldn't these countries have an edge over the others, and kind of
Your question is on budget, fiscal incentive budget or tax policy?
Corporative tax.
Corporate tax policy. Okay.
Okay, I will keep on asking. Just stick it to one question. We're going that way, and then we're going over there. So, Erin, please.
Thank you so much for the talk, Commissioner Ferreira. My name is Erin Sofianik. I'm in the Local Economic Development Program. And I'm curious to what extent and how do you think that the cohesion policy funds can be used to secure supply chains and build resilience in supply chains, especially internationally in sectors in which the European Union doesn't have a lot of capacity for production? For example, in like semiconductor chips. And do you think there's a role?
Repeat last word. Or speak a little bit louder because
Sorry, it's not coming through.
Hear it.
Yes, put it close to your mouth.
I'm just curious to what extent you feel that cohesion policy funds can be used to create resilience in international supply chains in spaces where there's not a lot of capacity for production in the European Union. And if you think there's space for that.
Then Harris. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for the panel. I'm Karen Zozek from Local Economic Development.
Yes, you say where you're from, because I think it's interesting as well.
Yeah, I'm from Kurdistan region of Iraq. And my question is around immigration. What are the key immigration policies for European Commission? And how does the immigrants contribute to the economic growth in Europe, and what are the priorities for EU?
All right, so thank you very much. And I'm going to take my prerogative as chair to ask the last question. You see the people and the students here. You're at the LSE, probably the most international university in the world. What would be the key recommendations that you will give if they are going to, many of them are going to go back to their countries and implement good things, perhaps do territorial development? What would you recommend that they do? And is there anything that they should avoid?
Well, on enlargement, I'm one of those persons that don't tend to worry a lot in the vacuum. What I think is that it's not the first time that we enlarge. So what we cannot do is ignore the adaptations that we need to do in order that the enlargement is a success. And I mentioned, I mean, everybody, I'm Portuguese from origin, and when Portugal and Spain joined the European Union, at that time, the European Economic Commission, EC, I mean, there was a panic in France because they were saying they are going to kill our agriculture. They are going to, because they are going to invade us with fruits and I don't know what vegetables and I don't know what. So, and yes, it was, they were very backward countries. It took us 10 years to get in. But in fact, you see that, and I personally have, because of my previous past, for instance, when there was this, all these water supply systems, it was British companies, French companies, Italian companies that were providing the, I mean, doing the job. And then the Portuguese learned how to do it and they were doing it. Same thing happens with Poland. I mean, the enlargement with Poland was really a nightmare. And you remember the Polish syndrome, the Polish plumber syndrome. I mean, what is this? I mean, nobody is worried with the Polish plumber coming here. And no, I mean, on the opposite, companies are moving there. And the growth is immense because all the potential of this country is growing. And even small countries like Portugal, as I mentioned, the biggest bank and the biggest distribution companies is Portuguese. So because there is an enlargement of the market. So the way you do it is the critical thing. It's not enlargement itself. Is, of course, we have got to revise or to review the institutional framework, because it's difficult to get an agreement with so many partners at the table. We have got to rethink that. Cohesion policy has got to be reinforced, and but I think it's very risky if people perceive that they will lose money or they will lose conditions for growth just because there is enlargement. Of course, there are aspects that I mentioned already of transfers of FDI and all this. We have got to live with that. But at the same time, we have got to be able to explore all the potentiality of helping Ukraine to rebuild, for instance. So I think we have got to manage, but I think we have done it before, and we managed. Then you were asking about corporate tax. That is a big issue. Now there is this initiative from the OECD to have a minimum tax. I find it very, very, very logic. In fact, with time, I mean, the tax policy was one of the aspects that was not harmonized in Europe because each member state wanted to have its own tax policy. And in fact, only the TVA is in a reasonable agreement framework, but the direct taxation is a prerogative of each member state. But the truth is that we care about the internal market, but when companies move from, I mean, in an answer, in a response to a very low tax regime, of course, they are transferring profit to these constituencies. And this creates a situation in which the budget of each country ends up, if nothing is done about it, being paid, I mean, by the labor, taxes on labor and taxes on small companies, which is really very, I mean, a big distortion in competition and in fairness, so to speak. So, of course, this is welcome. The European member states accepted it. There is progress because one thing is the minimum rate, It's this first step, and the other step is a reasonably harmonious calculation of the taxable income, because the exemptions that you put, so the methodologies have got to be agreed. This is work in progress as we are speaking. So, but there is progress in that direction, and I think it has got to be done, I mean, side by side with the internal market, because otherwise it doesn't work. Then I think the two questions that were asked, they are related in a way. Support to companies, and support this support to companies are limited by state aid rules. So I mean, if there are some limits that we call the minimis limits that really allow for a minimum of support to these companies. But otherwise, you can only finance certain companies to certain limits that are considered not to jeopardize the internal market. More recently, there was an agreement, I mean, 2 weeks ago, between the co-legislators. So the Commission makes a proposal, then the European Parliament and the Council change it, and they get to an agreement. They got to an agreement that you can subsidize or support more heavily, and we call it STEP, which was a recent initiative, the industries that are future-oriented, trying to mirror a little bit the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act. So industries such as biotechnology, clean technologies, or deep technologies, they can be supported, and there is a kind of special flexibility in state aid, in support that you can give. And at the same time, this started a little bit earlier, and with STEP, we are enlarging this possibility of financing these special companies, the possibility to finance them from with using the cohesion funding, if the region decides to do so, and if it matches the characteristics, to avoid that only the countries that have deep pockets can attract these companies. We'll see how it works. But in reality, since 2014, the support from the cohesion funds is only possible for small and medium companies, and for companies that do not jeopardize the environment objectives that we have. So do no harm to environment is a criterion for selection, but because particularly, I mean, in the past, the big multinationals, they were playing around, asking different regions, how much do you offer if we locate there, creating X jobs, and by the end of the day, in particular multinationals, they were gaining a lot of extra support that was not needed, just as a consequence of this competition. So cohesion policy stopped since 2014 financing these big companies, but now exceptionally in the areas of the just transition plans and in these sectors, it is possible to use cohesion funding to support big companies. We'll see how it works. It's a timely experiment, so it's a limited experiment. Limited experiment in time. So we'll see what happens. And in relation to your question, it's as in regional development, one size doesn't fit all. But I think if you are going to go away, I think there are certain good elements that we should take with us. One of them is that geography matters, and the country is a territory and people. So what happens in the life of these peoples, the opportunity that are open, are absolutely essential for the progress of countries. And the other message is that we are all in the same world. So better that we keep speaking to each other and trying really to avoid that, as in the multinational companies with cohesion funds, by competing with each other, we end up competing in subsidies or competing in tariff barriers, just to make sure that we protect from the unbalanced level playing field, unleveled playing field, I'm sorry, trying to compensate with this. This will be a massive cost for taxpayers, and I think we need really to reassess when we are talking about climate, where we are talking about human rights, respect for minimum conditions for labor, like for instance, not to do child labor and not to do slave labor, or not to kill the planet with the activities. I think we should better move quickly to agreeing minimum standards adapted to the different circumstances, because otherwise I believe that will be fighting among the different blocs, competing with tariffs and subsidies. But of course, I think it is also a responsibility that if we want to control, for instance, migration stops if people have good living conditions in the place where they are coming from. So probably support to development is quite an interesting investment, provided altogether we get the capacity to do it, but we need migrants. And this is my final thing, because as you saw, in fact, the demographic dynamics of Europe is very sluggish. So we really need migrants, but we don't need to fight with each other if we manage really to reproduce our concerns here at a global level, because it's the same paradigm. We need really to have a more prosperous future for all people in the world. And in fact, the growth is outside Europe. That is truth.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner Ferreira. It's been a great privilege to have you here, and we hope to have you here many more times in the future to give us your insights. So thank you very much, all of you, for attending. And remember, the Cañada Blanch Foundation Centre doesn't end up here. We continue with a series of activities that go on in the coming weeks. Starting next Tuesday, Jimmy Burns-Marañón is going to be talking about how the LSE in the past was really a place full of spies. So if you're interested, please come. There will be, on the 4th of April, Louis Dijkstra from the European Commission, who's going to come and talk about the future of cities. On the 5th, it would be José Pascual Marco, the Spanish ambassador, who is going to come and talk about the relationships between Spain and the UK. And finally, on the 25th of March, we'll end up this term with the former Minister of Health in Spain and current leader of the Socialist Party in Catalonia, Salvador Illa. So hopefully we can count on you. Please come. I'll be advertising. We will be advertising. Victor over there, who's moving with the microphone, will be advertising all these events. And we look forward to hosting you here. Thank you very much, and see you all soon.
I'm going to take this. It makes sense.
Thank you very much. You want the slides? We have slides over here.
I don't need it. It's just not to leave it. Not to leave rubbish.
Not to leave rubbish around. So
Not to leave rubbish around. Okay.